A kind-hearted black man named Marcus stops to help a desperate white woman, Sarah, change her flat tire on the side of the road. A simple act of kindness that he never thought would lead to anything more. But the next morning, a mysterious black SUV shows up at Marcus's house, sparking a chain of events that will change his life forever. What was it about this seemingly random encounter that turned Marcus's world upside down? And how did his selfless act ripple through his life in ways he never imagined? Let's find out. But before we dive into the story, comment below where you're watching from today. And if you enjoy this tale of unexpected twists and life-changing moments, don't forget to subscribe. Marcus Turner was the kind of man everyone in the small town of Brooksville knew and respected. At 35, he had settled into a life that, while simple, was filled with contentment. He worked as a maintenance technician at the local community center, a job that fit him like a glove. It wasn't glamorous, but it allowed him to do what he loved: help others. Whether it was fixing a broken door, repairing a leaky faucet, or simply lending a hand to someone in need, Marcus was always there, with a smile on his face and a warm, friendly demeanor that put everyone at ease. Brooksville was a town where life moved slowly, where people waved at each other as they passed by on the street, and where everyone knew everyone else's business. It was the kind of place where people took care of each other, and Marcus was a big part of that community spirit. He lived in a modest house on the edge of town, a small, single-story home that he had inherited from his parents. The house wasn't much, but it was his, and it was filled with memories of a childhood spent playing in the large, oak-shaded yard and learning the value of hard work and kindness from his parents. Every morning, Marcus would wake up before dawn, make himself a cup of coffee, and sit on his porch, watching the sun rise over the trees. It was his favorite time of day, a moment of peace before the world woke up and the demands of the day began. After his quiet morning ritual, he would head into town, stopping by the local diner for breakfast. The waitress there, Mrs. Jenkins, always had his order ready: a plate of scrambled eggs, toast, and a side of bacon. They would chat about the latest town gossip, the weather, or whatever else was on their minds before Marcus made his way to the community center. His days were filled with tasks that might seem mundane to others but were fulfilling to him. Fixing things, helping out with events at the center, and just being a friendly face that people could rely on. His co-workers admired his work ethic, but more than that, they admired his heart. Marcus was the kind of man who would go out of his way to help someone, not because he wanted anything in return, but simply because it was the right thing to do. One evening, after a long day of work, Marcus was driving home on a quiet, winding road that led out of town. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow over the landscape. Marcus enjoyed these drives, the solitude, and the chance to unwind before getting home. As he rounded a bend, he noticed a car pulled over on the side of the road, its hazard lights flashing in the dimming light. Slowing down, he saw a woman standing next to the car, clearly distressed. Without a second thought, Marcus pulled over. As he got out of his truck, the woman looked up, her face a mix of relief and anxiety. She was young, in her late 20s, with blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. Her clothes were businesslike, a pencil skirt and blouse, but they were slightly disheveled, as if she had been struggling with something. "Hey there," Marcus called out as he approached. "Need some help?" The woman nodded, visibly relieved. "Yes, please. I've got a flat tire, and I have no idea how to change it. I've been trying to figure it out," but she gestured helplessly to the car, where the tools lay scattered on the ground. Marcus smiled kindly. "No worries. I've changed more tires than I can count. I'll have you back on the road in no time." He walked over to the car, a sleek silver sedan, and quickly assessed the situation. The tire was indeed flat, completely deflated, and it looked like she had been driving on it for a bit before realizing something was wrong. Marcus rolled up his sleeves and got to work, setting the jack in place and lifting the car with ease. As he worked, the woman stood by, watching him with a mixture of gratitude and nervousness. "Thank you so much for stopping," she said after a few moments of silence. "I didn't know what I was going to do." "No problem at all," Marcus replied, glancing up at her with a reassuring smile. "Glad I could help." The woman shifted on her feet, her eyes darting around nervously. "I'm Sarah, by the way," she said, trying to make conversation. "Sarah Collins. Nice to meet you, Sarah." Marcus said, focusing on loosening the lug nuts. I'm Marcus. Sarah nodded, her expression still tense. I was on my way home from work. It's been a long day, and I guess I didn't notice the tire going flat until it was too late. It happens, Marcus said. Roads out here can be rough on tires, especially if you're not used to them. Sarah gave a small, strained laugh. Yeah, I'm not from around here. Just moved to the area a few months ago. Still getting used to it, I guess. Marcus finished removing the flat tire and started putting on the spare. Brooksville's a nice place once you get to know it. Folks around here are friendly, always willing to lend a hand. Sarah nodded again, but she didn't say anything further. Marcus noticed the way she kept glancing around, as if she was expecting something or someone. But he didn't pry. People had their reasons for being nervous, and it wasn't his place to ask. Within a few minutes, Marcus had the spare tire securely in place. He lowered the car back down and tightened the lug nuts, making sure everything was safe and secure. He stood up, wiping his hands on a rag he kept in his truck. There you go, he said, stepping back to admire his work. You should be good to go now. Just make sure you get that tire fixed or replaced soon. The spare's only meant for short distances. Sarah let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Thank you, Marcus. Really, I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't stopped. Marcus smiled, shaking his head. It's no trouble at all. Just glad I was passing by when I did. Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out a small wad of cash. Please take this. It's the least I can do for all your help. Marcus looked at the money, then back at Sarah, and gently shook his head. I can't take that. Helping out someone in need is payment enough. Sarah hesitated, clearly not expecting him to refuse. Are you sure? It's not much, but I really want to show my appreciation. Marcus smiled again, his eyes warm and kind. I'm sure. Just drive safe and take care of that tire. That's all the thanks I need. Sarah looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to figure out what kind of man would turn down easy money. Finally, she nodded, slipping the cash back into her purse. Thank you, Marcus. I won't forget this. You're welcome, Marcus replied, giving her a nod. Take care now. With that, Marcus walked back to his truck, watching as Sarah got into her car and started the engine. She gave him one last look, a mix of gratitude and something else he couldn't quite place, before driving off into the evening. As Marcus climbed into his truck, he thought about the encounter. It wasn't unusual for him to help someone out. He did it all the time. But there was something about Sarah that seemed different. He couldn't put his finger on it, but the nervous way she had acted, the way she had looked around as if expecting trouble, stuck with him. He shrugged it off as he started his truck and headed home. People had their own lives and their own worries, and it wasn't his place to pry. He had done what he always did, help someone in need, and that was enough. As he drove the rest of the way home, the sky darkened, the last of the sunlight fading into the horizon. Marcus was tired, ready for a quiet evening at home, but there was a lingering thought in the back of his mind, a sense that this simple act of kindness might lead to something more, something unexpected. But for now, he pushed those thoughts aside. Tomorrow was another day, and whatever came with it, Marcus knew he would face it with the same kindness and strength that had always guided him. As he pulled into his driveway and turned off the engine, Marcus took a deep breath, savoring the peace of the evening. He had done a good deed, just like any other day. Little did he know, this particular good deed was about to change his life in ways he could never have imagined. And with that, Marcus stepped out of his truck, heading inside to the warmth of his home, unaware of the chain of events that had just been set into motion. Marcus woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside his window, the morning sun casting a warm glow across his small bedroom. It was a routine start to what he thought would be another typical day. He stretched, rubbed his eyes, and swung his legs out of bed. The floor was cool beneath his feet as he made his way to the kitchen to start his day with a cup of coffee, just like he did every morning. As the coffee brewed, Marcus glanced out of the window above the sink, taking in a view of his quiet street. The neighborhood was still, with only a few early risers out for their morning walks. His eyes drifted to the curb outside his house, where a black SUV was parked. It was sleek and new, the kind of vehicle that stood out in a place like Brooksville, where most people drove older, more practical cars. Marcus frowned slightly, but didn't think much of it at first. Maybe it belonged to someone visiting a neighbor, or perhaps it was just a random car that happened to be parked there. He finished making his coffee and sat down at the kitchen table, flipping through the morning paper. As he sipped his coffee, he couldn't help but glance back out the window at the SUV. It was still there, parked in the same spot, with no sign of anyone around it. The minutes ticked by, and the SUV didn't move. Marcus found himself growing more curious. It wasn't like him to get caught up in other people's business, but something about the presence of the vehicle made him uneasy. He pushed the feeling aside, telling himself it was nothing, and went about his morning routine. After breakfast, Marcus got ready for work. He grabbed his keys, locked up the house, and headed out the door. As he stepped onto his porch, he glanced over at the SUV again. The windows were tinted, making it impossible to see inside, and the engine was off. It didn't seem like anyone was in it, but the sight of it still nagged at him. Shaking his head, Marcus walked to his truck, trying to put the SUV out of his mind. He had a full day of work ahead, and the last thing he needed was to get distracted by something that probably had nothing to do with him. He climbed into his truck, started the engine, and pulled out of the driveway, casting one last glance at the SUV as he drove away. It remained parked where it was, as still and silent as it had been all morning. Marcus arrived at the community center a few minutes later, greeted by the familiar sights and sounds of the place. The staff was already bustling around, preparing for the day's activities. As he walked through the doors, he was met with smiles and nods from his co-workers, all of whom appreciated the steady presence Marcus provided. "Morning, Marcus," called out Denise, the receptionist, as he walked by her desk. "Morning, Denise," Marcus replied with a smile. "Everything running smoothly today?" "As smooth as it can be," Denise said with a chuckle. "You know how it is." Marcus nodded, making his way to the maintenance room where he kept his tools and supplies. He had a few tasks lined up for the day: fixing a leaky faucet in one of the bathrooms, repairing a door that had come off its hinges, and helping set up for an event in the main hall. It was nothing he hadn't done before, and he welcomed the work. As the morning wore on, Marcus found himself distracted, his thoughts drifting back to the black SUV. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was unusual for a car to be parked outside his house for so long without any sign of movement. The more he thought about it, the more uneasy he became. By lunchtime, Marcus decided to take a break and clear his head. He left the community center and walked down the street to the local grocery store, intending to grab a sandwich and some fresh air. The store was a short walk away, and Marcus enjoyed the stroll, taking in the sights and sounds of the town he loved. As he approached the store, he noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. The black SUV was parked across the street. It was the same one, unmistakably so, with its tinted windows and sleek, black exterior. Marcus stopped in his tracks, staring at the vehicle. It was no longer just a coincidence. The SUV was following him. He stood there for a moment, trying to decide what to do. His first instinct was to confront whoever was in the vehicle, but he wasn't sure if that was the right move. What if he was overreacting? What if it was just a strange series of coincidences? But deep down, Marcus knew that wasn't the case. Taking a deep breath, Marcus walked into the grocery store, his mind racing. He grabbed a sandwich from the deli and paid for it at the counter, all the while thinking about the SUV. As he exited the store, he glanced across the street again. The SUV was still there, its presence now a looming, unsettling shadow over what should have been a normal day. Marcus didn't head straight back to work. Instead, he walked in the opposite direction, hoping to see if the SUV would follow him. He took a roundabout route through town, passing by the park, the library, and a few other local spots. Each time he turned a corner, he checked to see if the SUV was still there. Sure enough, every time he looked, the SUV was close by, never too far away, but always keeping its distance. It was clear now. Someone was following him, and they didn't want to be seen. By the time Marcus returned to the community center, his unease had turned into a gnawing sense of anxiety. He tried to focus on his work, but the thought of the SUV lurking nearby made it impossible. He found himself glancing out the windows, half expecting to see the vehicle parked somewhere close. The rest of the day passed in a blur, and when it was finally time to go home, Marcus felt a heavy weight in his chest. He left the community center, his eyes scanning the streets for any sign of the SUV. It wasn't there, but that didn't mean much. It could still be nearby, watching him, waiting for him to let his guard down. As he drove home, Marcus kept checking his rearview mirror, expecting to see the black SUV tailing him. But the drive was uneventful, and by the time he pulled into his driveway, the vehicle was nowhere to be seen. For a moment, Marcus allowed himself to relax, thinking that maybe, just maybe, it was all over. But as he stepped out of his truck and headed towards his front door, something caught his eye. The black SUV was back. It was parked at the end of his street, just far enough away to be out of sight unless you were looking for it. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest as he stared at the vehicle, trying to make sense of what was happening. He stood there for a few minutes, debating his next move. Should he go over and confront whoever was in the SUV? Or should he call the police and report the suspicious activity? Neither option felt right. The police in Brooksville were good people, but they might not take him seriously. And confronting someone who was clearly trying to stay hidden could be dangerous. In the end, Marcus decided to go inside and wait. He locked the door behind him and walked over to the window, peering out at the SUV. It hadn't moved, but its presence felt like a dark cloud hanging over his home. He couldn't ignore it any longer. Something was definitely wrong. The night passed slowly, with Marcus unable to sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the SUV parked outside, its tinted windows hiding whatever secrets lay within. He kept checking the window, hoping to see the vehicle gone, but it remained in the same spot, a silent sentinel watching over his house. The next morning, Marcus woke up groggy and unrest. He had finally managed to fall asleep in the early hours of the morning, but it hadn't been enough. He made himself a cup of coffee and sat down at the kitchen table, staring out the window. The SUV was gone, but Marcus knew it would be back. As he sipped his coffee, Marcus tried to figure out what to do. He couldn't keep living like this, constantly looking over his shoulder, waiting for something to happen. He needed answers, and the only way to get them was to confront whoever was in that SUV. Later that day, after he had finished his work at the community center, Marcus decided it was time to take action. He left work early, hoping to catch the SUV off guard. As he drove home, he kept an eye out for the vehicle, expecting it to appear at any moment. Sure enough, as he neared his street, Marcus spotted the SUV parked at the end of the block. His heart raced as he pulled into his driveway, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. He wasn't sure what he was going to say or do, but he knew he couldn't keep avoiding this confrontation. Stepping out of his truck, Marcus took a deep breath and started walking towards the SUV. His footsteps were heavy, his heart pounding in his chest as he closed the distance. The closer he got, the more his nerves buzzed with anticipation. He didn't know what to expect, but he was ready to face it. When he was just a few feet away from the SUV, the driver's side window rolled down slightly. Marcus could see a shadowy figure behind the tinted glass, but he couldn't make out any details. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could get a word out, the SUV's engine roared to life. The vehicle sped off down the street, tires screeching as it turned the corner and disappeared from view. Marcus stood there, stunned, his heart still racing. The confrontation he had been preparing for had ended before it even began, leaving him with more questions than answers. As he walked back to his house, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Whoever was in that SUV had gone to great lengths to follow him, and they weren't going to stop now. The mystery was only just beginning, and Marcus knew that he was in for a lot more than he had bargained for. Marcus had spent the entire night restless, his mind racing with thoughts of the black SUV and the shadowy figure who had driven off before he could confront them. He couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen, something that would disrupt the quiet, peaceful life he had built for himself. As the morning sun filtered through the blinds, Marcus sighed, resigned to the fact that today might bring answers, whether he was ready for them or not. After his usual routine of coffee and breakfast, Marcus decided to take a walk to clear his mind. The crisp morning air did little to calm his nerves, but he found solace in the familiar sights and sounds of his neighborhood. Children were playing in the yards, and neighbors waved as he passed by. For a moment, it almost felt like a normal day. But that sense of normalcy shattered when he returned home. As he approached his house, Marcus saw the black SUV parked in the same spot it had been the day before. His heart sank, but this time he wasn't filled with the same dread. Instead, a sense of determination settled in. He needed to find out who was behind this and why they were so intent on following him. Marcus stood on his front porch, staring at the SUV. It was then that he noticed something different. Two men, dressed in sharp suits, were stepping out of the vehicle. They moved with an air of authority, their expressions calm and composed as they made their way toward him. "Good morning, Mr. Johnson," one of the men said as they reached the porch. He was tall, with graying hair slicked back neatly, and he spoke with a smooth, polished tone that immediately put Marcus on guard. The other man, slightly younger and with a steely gaze, stood silently by his side. "Morning," Marcus replied cautiously, not sure how to respond. He crossed his arms, trying to appear calm even as his mind raced with questions. The older man smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Allow me to introduce myself. My name is James Bennett, and this is my associate, Mr. Turner. We represent the Montgomery family." Marcus's brow furrowed in confusion. The Montgomery family? The name didn't ring any bells. "Yes," Bennett continued, his voice smooth as silk. "I believe you had a brief encounter with one of their family members recently, Miss Sarah Montgomery." Marcus's eyes widened as he recalled the woman he had helped on the side of the road. The flat tire, the late hour, her nervous demeanor, it all came rushing back. "Sarah Montgomery," he repeated, more to himself than to the man. "I didn't realize." "Sarah is the daughter of Mr. Richard Montgomery," Bennett explained, as if sensing Marcus's surprise. "A name you might recognize. He's a well-known businessman, a billionaire in fact." Marcus stared at the men, trying to process what he was hearing. "I didn't know," he said slowly, still trying to wrap his mind around the idea that the woman he had helped was the daughter of a billionaire. "No, of course you didn't," Bennett said, waving a hand dismissively. "Miss Montgomery didn't share her identity with you, and we understand why. It was a stressful situation, and she was likely more concerned with getting home safely." Marcus nodded, unsure of what to say. The whole situation was surreal. He had simply done what he thought was right, helping someone in need, and now here were these men, representatives of a powerful family, standing on his porch. "What do you want from me?" Marcus finally asked, his tone guarded. Bennett smiled again, this time with a hint of something more, perhaps amusement. "We're not here to ask anything of you, Mr. Johnson. Quite the opposite, actually. We're here to offer you something." "Offer me something?" Marcus echoed, his suspicion growing. This didn't feel right. "What could you possibly offer me?" Turner, the younger man, finally spoke up, his voice firm and direct. "We're here to reward you, Mr. Johnson, for your kindness, your selflessness. The Montgomery family doesn't take such acts lightly." Marcus frowned, his mind racing. "Reward me? For what? I just helped her change a tire. Anyone would have done the same." "That may be true," Bennett said, stepping closer. "But you did it, Mr. Johnson. You stopped, you helped her, and you asked for nothing in return. That means something to the Montgomerys." Marcus shook his head, still not understanding. "I don't need a reward. I was just doing what I thought was right. And that's precisely why they want to reward you," Bennett said, his tone earnest. "Your actions, your character, they stand out in a world where so many would have just driven by. The Montgomery family appreciates that." Marcus looked from Bennett to Turner, trying to read their expressions. There was something about the way they spoke, the way they carried themselves, that put him on edge. They were too polished, too practiced. He didn't trust them. "What kind of reward are we talking about?" Marcus asked, his voice cautious. He didn't want to get involved in something he didn't understand, especially with people who clearly had a lot of power and influence. Bennett exchanged a glance with Turner before answering. "That, Mr. Johnson, is up to you. The Montgomerys have the means to change your life in ways you can't even imagine. They could offer you money, a new home, a better job, whatever you desire." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "And what's the catch?" "No catch," Bennett assured him, though the way he said it made Marcus even more suspicious. "This is simply their way of saying thank you. A gesture of goodwill." Marcus didn't believe that for a second. "Nothing's ever free," he said, shaking his head. "Especially not from people like the Montgomerys." Bennett's smile faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered. I understand your hesitation, Mr. Johnson, but I assure you, there are no strings attached. You did something good, and the Montgomerys want to repay that kindness. Marcus stood in silence, trying to make sense of it all. It was tempting. Who wouldn't want their life to be easier, better? But something deep inside him, a voice he couldn't ignore, told him that accepting anything from these men would come with a price he might not be willing to pay. I appreciate the offer, Marcus finally said, his voice steady, but I'm not interested. Bennett and Turner exchanged another look, this one less controlled. Turner seemed about to say something, but Bennett held up a hand to stop him. Mr. Johnson, Bennett began, his tone still calm, but with an edge of insistence. Perhaps you should take some time to consider. This isn't an opportunity that comes along every day. Marcus shook his head firmly. I don't need time to consider. I'm not interested. I live a good life, and I'm happy with what I have. I don't need anything from the Montgomerys. Turner's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Marcus thought the younger man might push the issue. But Bennett quickly stepped in, his smile returning, though it was colder now. Of course, Mr. Johnson. We respect your decision. Marcus nodded, relieved that they weren't going to press further. Thank you for understanding. Bennett reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small card, handing it to Marcus. If you change your mind, or if there's anything you need, don't hesitate to reach out. The Montgomerys are always willing to help those who show kindness. Marcus took the card, glancing at the simple, elegant design. It had only a phone number printed on it, with no other identifying information. He nodded, slipping it into his pocket more out of politeness than anything else. Thank you, he said, though he didn't plan on ever using the card. Bennett and Turner nodded in unison, their businesslike demeanor returning. We'll take our leave now, Mr. Johnson, Bennett said, turning to walk back to the SUV. We wish you all the best. Turner followed, his expression unreadable as he glanced back at Marcus one last time before getting into the vehicle. Marcus watched them go, his mind still reeling from the encounter. The SUV drove away, leaving him standing on his porch, holding the card in his hand. As the vehicle disappeared down the street, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. The Montgomery family was powerful, and they weren't the type to take no for an answer. He had no doubt that they would try to contact him again, and he wasn't sure how he would handle it when they did. He went back inside, the card still clutched in his hand. He stared at it for a long time, debating whether to keep it or throw it away. Part of him wanted to get rid of it, to remove any trace of the strange encounter from his life. But another part of him, the part that was curious and maybe a little afraid, told him to hold on to it, just in case. Marcus eventually tucked the card into a drawer in the kitchen, out of sight but not entirely out of mind. He tried to go about his day as usual, but the encounter with Bennett and Turner lingered in his thoughts. Their vague promises, the way they spoke of life-changing rewards, it all felt too good to be true. And yet, there was a part of Marcus that wondered what his life could be like if he had accepted their offer. What would it be like to have money, influence, power? To not have to worry about bills or work or anything else that had weighed him down for so long. But Marcus knew himself well enough to know that those things wouldn't make him happy. He had always been content with the simple life he led, and he wasn't willing to trade that for anything, not even for the promise of something better. As the day went on, Marcus tried to push the encounter from his mind, focusing instead on the things that mattered to him. He spent time with his friends, worked on a few projects around the house, and even went for a jog in the evening, trying to clear his mind. But no matter what he did, he couldn't shake the feeling that the Montgomerys weren't done with him yet. He knew that they would come back, and when they did, he would have to be ready. That night, as Marcus lay in bed, he couldn't sleep. His mind kept replaying the conversation with Bennett and Turner, the way they had spoken to him, the promises they had made. It all felt like a dream, something unreal that had intruded on his otherwise ordinary life. But as Marcus stared up at the ceiling, he knew that this was his reality now. The Montgomerys were real, and they had taken an interest in him. He just didn't know why, or what they really wanted from him. And that uncertainty, that fear of the unknown, was what kept him awake long into the night. Marcus lay awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling as the events of the past few days swirled through his mind. The visit from Bennett and Turner had left him unsettled, and despite his firm refusal, the offer they had made kept gnawing at him. The weight of their words lingered, and as much as he tried to push it aside, he couldn't help but wonder what might happen if he accepted. The idea of being rewarded for a simple act of kindness felt foreign to Marcus. He had always lived his life by a set of principles: humility, integrity, and a belief in doing what was right without expecting anything in return. The notion that his good deed could lead to something more, something life-changing, conflicted with those values. And yet, there was an undeniable allure to the possibilities that the Montgomery family's wealth and power could offer. As the night wore on, Marcus found himself reflecting deeply on his life. He thought about the years he had spent working hard, making ends meet, and finding contentment in the small joys of life. He wasn't a man who craved luxury or recognition. He found fulfillment in the relationships he had built, the community he was part of, and the simple pleasures that came from living an honest life. But now, that life seemed to be at a crossroads. The decision he had made on the side of the road that night, the choice to help Sarah Montgomery, had set off a chain of events that he could never have predicted. And with that, the decision he faced now felt weightier than anything he had ever encountered. Unable to sleep, Marcus finally got out of bed and made his way to the small living room. He sat down on the worn couch, running a hand through his hair as he considered his next steps. He knew he couldn't make this decision alone. He needed the counsel of those he trusted most. The next morning, Marcus reached out to a few close friends and family members, asking them to come over for a conversation. He didn't tell them much over the phone, just that he needed their advice on something important. By the early afternoon, they had gathered in his living room, a mix of concerned and curious expressions on their faces. Among them were his childhood friend, Derek, a man who had always been like a brother to him, his sister, Angela, who had a sharp mind and a no-nonsense attitude, and his Aunt Clara, a wise woman who had seen more of life's ups and downs than most. They all sat around the small coffee table, looking at Marcus expectantly. "So, what's this all about?" Derek asked, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "You sounded pretty serious on the phone." Marcus took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "Something happened a few days ago," he began, recounting the events of the night he had helped Sarah and the subsequent visit from the two men. As he spoke, he watched their reactions. Derek's brow furrowed in thought, Angela's eyes narrowing with suspicion, and Aunt Clara nodding slowly, as if she had already anticipated where the story was going. When Marcus finished, there was a heavy silence in the room. Finally, Angela spoke up, her tone direct. "So, let me get this straight. These men came to your house, offering you a reward because you helped some rich girl on the side of the road?" Marcus nodded. "That's right. But it wasn't just any reward. They made it sound like they could change my life completely. Money, a new house, whatever I wanted." Derek let out a low whistle. "Man, that's some serious stuff. And you just turned them down?" "Yeah," Marcus replied, though the doubt in his voice was evident. "I told them I wasn't interested, that I didn't want anything from them. But, I don't know, something about the whole thing doesn't sit right with me." Angela leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "Of course it doesn't sit right. These people don't offer something for nothing, especially not someone with that kind of power and money. There's always a catch." "I agree," Aunt Clara said, her voice calm but firm. "In my experience, when someone offers you the world, they usually expect something in return. And it's not always something you're willing to give." Derek nodded thoughtfully. "But still, it's not every day you get an offer like that. I mean, they could really change your life, Marcus. You wouldn't have to worry about money or anything else again. And what would he have to give up in return?" Angela countered, her voice sharp. "His independence? His peace of mind? We don't know these people, Derek. We don't know what they're really after." Marcus sighed, rubbing his temples as the conflicting opinions swirled around him. He had hoped that talking it out would bring him some clarity, but it only seemed to make the decision more complicated. "Look," he said finally, "I didn't bring you all here to argue. I just wanted your perspectives because I'm torn. On one hand, I know I could really use the help they're offering. But on the other hand, I'm worried about what it might cost me in the long run." Aunt Clara reached over and placed a comforting hand on Marcus's arm. "You're a good man, Marcus. You've always done what's right, and that's why you're struggling with this. But remember, it's not just about what you stand to gain. It's about what you might lose too. Her words hit home, and Marcus nodded, appreciating her wisdom. But before he could respond, there was a knock at the door. Everyone fell silent, exchanging puzzled glances. Marcus stood up, his heart racing as he went to answer the door. He hadn't been expecting anyone else, and after everything that had happened, he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. When he opened the door, his breath caught in his throat. Standing on the porch was Sarah Montgomery, the very woman he had helped that night. She looked different from the last time he had seen her, more composed, but with a weariness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Sarah," Marcus said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" "Marcus," she replied, her voice soft but urgent. "I'm sorry to show up like this, but I need to talk to you. Can I come in?" Marcus hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside, allowing her to enter. As she walked into the living room, the others looked at her with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Sarah glanced around, clearly aware of the tension in the room. "Hello," she said, offering a polite nod to the others. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I really needed to speak with Marcus." "It's okay," Marcus said, guiding her to a seat. "We were just talking about everything that's happened." Sarah nodded, taking a deep breath as she sat down. "I figured as much, and that's why I'm here. There's something I need to tell you, Marcus. Something I didn't mention before." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. He had known there was more to this story, but he hadn't expected Sarah to come to him directly. "What is it?" Sarah looked around the room, her gaze lingering on each person before finally settling on Marcus. "The night you helped me, it wasn't just a flat tire that I was dealing with. I was running away." "Running away?" Derek echoed, his voice filled with surprise. "From what?" Sarah's expression tightened, and she looked down at her hands, clasped tightly in her lap. "From my family, or more specifically, from the people my family is involved with. You see, my father, he's a powerful man, but he's made some dangerous enemies over the years. People who wouldn't hesitate to use me to get to him." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as he listened to Sarah's words. This was more than he had ever imagined, more than just a simple act of kindness gone awry. "The night you found me," Sarah continued, "I had just escaped from a situation where I was being held by people who were trying to leverage my father's power. They were dangerous, and I knew I had to get away. That's why I was so desperate, so scared." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed what Sarah was saying. Marcus could hardly believe it. The woman he had helped had been in danger, caught up in a web of power and intrigue that he could barely comprehend. "I didn't tell you any of this because, well, I didn't want to drag you into it," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. "But now, I realize that you're already involved, whether you want to be or not. And that's why I'm here, to warn you." Marcus's mind was spinning. "Warn me? About what?" "About my family," Sarah said, meeting his eyes with a look of deep concern. "They're not bad people, but they're powerful, and they're desperate to protect me. That's why they sent those men to you, to try to repay you for what you did. But Marcus, I need you to understand, accepting their offer might come with consequences. You could be drawn into something far more dangerous than you realize." Marcus's throat tightened as he considered her words. He had suspected that there was more to the Montgomery's offer, but hearing it from Sarah herself made it all the more real. "What should I do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah hesitated, then reached out and placed a hand on his. "I can't tell you what to do, Marcus, but I can tell you this: whatever choice you make, do it for yourself, not for them. Don't let them control your life, no matter how tempting their offer might be." Her words resonated with Marcus, striking a chord deep within him. He had always prided himself on being his own man, on living life on his own terms. The thought of losing that independence, of being caught up in the Montgomery's world, filled him with a deep sense of unease. But before he could respond, Sarah continued, her voice filled with emotion. "And Marcus, thank you. What you did for me that night, it meant more than you'll ever know. You saved me, not just from a flat tire, but from something much darker. And for that, I'll always be grateful." Marcus looked into her eyes, seeing the sincerity and gratitude there. He realized then that this wasn't just about the reward or the offer from her family. It was about the impact his actions had on another person's life and the ripple effects that had followed. As they sat in silence, the weight of the decision ahead pressed down on Marcus. He knew that whatever choice he made, it would change the course of his life in ways he couldn't yet imagine. But one thing was clear: he couldn't make this decision lightly. It would require careful thought, consideration, and above all, staying true to the values that had guided him all his life. As the evening drew to a close and his friends and family began to leave, Marcus remained deep in thought. He walked Sarah to the door, her presence a reminder of the complexity of the situation he now faced. "Take care, Marcus," Sarah said softly as she stepped outside. "And remember, you're not alone in this. Whatever happens, you have people who care about you." Marcus nodded, watching as she walked down the steps and disappeared into the night. The weight of her words lingered with him as he closed the door, locking it behind him. Now alone in his house, Marcus knew that the time had come to make a decision. It was a decision that would define the path he would take from here on out. A choice between maintaining the simple, quiet life he had always known, or stepping into a world of power, influence, and unknown dangers. As he sat back down on the couch, Marcus took a deep breath, his thoughts racing as he considered the possibilities. But no matter what choice he made, one thing was certain: his life would never be the same again. Marcus sat at his kitchen table, the early morning light streaming through the window. The decision he had to make weighed heavily on him. He had spent the entire night reflecting on everything that had happened: the black SUV, the men in suits, Sarah's visit, and the offer that had been laid before him. It was an offer that could change his life, but it also came with strings attached. Marcus had always valued his independence, his ability to live life on his own terms. The thought of becoming entangled in the Montgomery family's world of wealth and power made him uneasy. But he couldn't ignore the potential good that could come from accepting their offer. With the resources they were offering, he could make a real difference in his community. The thought of being able to provide for those in need, to create opportunities for the young people in his town, was something that deeply appealed to him. It was a chance to give back in a way he had never been able to before. After hours of contemplation, Marcus made up his mind. He would accept the offer, but only on his terms. He wasn't going to be a pawn in the Montgomery's game. If they wanted to reward him, it would be for the benefit of his community, not for their own interests. Later that day, Marcus called the number the men had given him. His voice was calm, but firm as he spoke to one of the representatives. "I've made my decision," he said. "I'm willing to accept the reward, but there are conditions." The man on the other end of the line seemed surprised but intrigued. "We're listening," he replied. Marcus took a deep breath and outlined his terms. He wanted the resources to go toward building a community center in his neighborhood, a place where kids could come after school, where adults could access job training and educational programs, and where families could receive support. He also wanted to set up a scholarship fund for underprivileged students, giving them the chance to pursue higher education. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Marcus could hear the man discussing the terms with someone else in the room. Finally, the representative spoke again. "Mr. Williams, we appreciate your proposal. We'll need to discuss this further with the family, but I believe we can come to an agreement." Marcus felt a sense of relief wash over him. He had taken control of the situation, turning what could have been a burden into an opportunity to help others. The representative assured him that they would be in touch soon with the final details. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. The Montgomery family agreed to Marcus's terms, and soon, plans were set in motion to build the community center and establish the scholarship fund. Marcus was at the center of it all, working closely with architects, community leaders, and educators to ensure that the projects would truly benefit those in need. As the days passed, Marcus noticed a change in his life. The black SUV, once a source of anxiety and uncertainty, now followed him as a protective presence. It no longer symbolized mystery and fear, but rather the support and resources that were now at his disposal. He had gone from being a quiet, humble man who lived a simple life to someone with the power to create real, lasting change. Despite the newfound influence, Marcus remained grounded. He continued his daily routines, stopping to chat with neighbors, helping out at the local church, and offering a helping hand whenever he could. But now, he had the means to do so on a much larger scale. The community center became a beacon of hope in the neighborhood, a place where people from all walks of life could come together and support one another. The scholarship fund gave young people a chance at a brighter future, one that many had never thought possible. One day, as Marcus walked past the newly constructed community center, he saw a group of children playing basketball on the court. Their laughter filled the air, a sound that warmed his heart. He smiled to himself, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. This was what it was all about, using what he had been given to uplift others. As time went on, Marcus's story became well known throughout the town. People marveled at how a simple act of kindness had led to such a profound transformation, not just in Marcus's life, but in the lives of so many others. The ripple effect of that one moment, when he stopped to help a stranded woman on the side of the road, had spread far and wide. Marcus remained humble through it all, never forgetting where he came from or the values that had guided him. He continued to help others, just as he had before, but now with the added benefit of the resources and connections he had gained. He became a mentor to the young people in the community, offering guidance and support as they navigated their own paths in life. One evening, as the sun set over the town, Marcus sat on the porch of his modest home, reflecting on everything that had happened. The black SUV was parked across the street, as it had been for weeks, but it no longer felt out of place. It was a reminder of the journey he had been on, of the choices he had made, and of the impact he had been able to have on the world around him. Sarah had stayed in touch, visiting the community center and offering her own support to the projects Marcus had initiated. She had found a sense of purpose in giving back, inspired by the kindness that Marcus had shown her that night on the roadside. Together, they had forged a friendship that was based on mutual respect and a shared desire to make a difference. As Marcus looked out at the town, he knew that his life had changed in ways he could never have imagined. But at his core, he was still the same man, humble, kind, and driven by a desire to help others. The wealth and influence he had gained were tools, nothing more, to be used in service of something greater. In the end, it wasn't the reward that had made the biggest impact. It was the act of kindness that had set everything in motion. Marcus understood now that every action, no matter how small, had the potential to change the world. And that knowledge was the greatest reward of all. As he stood up and walked back into his house, Marcus felt a deep sense of peace. He had made his decision, and it was the right one. His life was no longer just about himself. It was about the community, about the future, and about the endless possibilities that lay ahead. And as he closed the door behind him, he knew that whatever came next, he was ready for it. The road ahead was uncertain, but with the lessons he had learned and the people he had helped, Marcus was confident that he could face anything with the same kindness and determination that had brought him this far. As the months passed, the impact of Marcus's decision rippled through Brooksville like waves on a pond. The community center he had envisioned was now a thriving hub of activity, its doors open to all who sought education, support, or simply a place to belong. The scholarship fund had already changed the lives of several promising students, giving them opportunities they never thought possible. But perhaps the most profound change was in Marcus himself. On a crisp autumn morning, Marcus stood outside the community center, watching as a group of volunteers planted trees along the newly paved walkway. The sound of laughter and friendly chatter filled the air, a stark contrast to the quiet, almost somber atmosphere that had once characterized this part of town. "Quite a sight, isn't it?" a familiar voice said from behind him. Marcus turned to see Sarah Montgomery standing there, a warm smile on her face. She had become a frequent visitor to Brooksville, her initial wariness replaced by a genuine enthusiasm for the changes taking place. "It really is," Marcus replied, his voice filled with a mixture of pride and humility. "Sometimes I still can't believe how much has changed." Sarah nodded, her eyes scanning the bustling scene before them. "You've done amazing things here, Marcus. You've given people hope." Marcus shook his head slightly, a habit he had developed whenever someone tried to give him too much credit. "We've all done this together. I just pointed us in the right direction." As they stood there, watching the community come together, Marcus couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought him to this point. The decision to accept the Montgomery family's offer, but on his own terms, had been a turning point. It had opened doors he never knew existed, but it had also presented challenges he never anticipated. One of those challenges walked up to them at that moment. James Bennett, the man who had first approached Marcus on behalf of the Montgomery family. His polished exterior remained unchanged, but there was a newfound respect in his eyes as he greeted Marcus. "Mr. Johnson," Bennett said, extending his hand. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Marcus shook his hand, noting the firmness of Bennett's grip. "Not at all, Mr. Bennett. Sarah and I were just admiring the progress." Bennett nodded, his gaze sweeping over the community center and the surrounding area. "It's truly remarkable what you've accomplished here. The family is impressed." There was a weight to Bennett's words that Marcus had come to recognize. The Montgomery family's approval was not easily earned, and it often came with expectations. "I'm glad to hear that," Marcus replied carefully. "But I hope they understand that this isn't about impressing anyone. It's about doing what's right for the community." Bennett's expression remained neutral, but there was a flicker of something, admiration perhaps, in his eyes. "Of course. That's precisely why the family is interested in expanding the scope of your work." Marcus felt a familiar tension settle in his shoulders. He had known this moment would come eventually. The Montgomerys weren't content with just funding a single community center and scholarship program. They saw potential in Marcus, potential they wanted to harness. "Expanding?" Marcus asked, his tone measured. "In what way?" Bennett reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a sleek folder. "We've drawn up some proposals. The family believes your model could be replicated in other communities across the state, perhaps even nationally." Marcus took the folder, feeling its weight in his hands. It represented more than just paper and ink. It was a crossroads, another moment that could change the course of his life. "I'll look it over," Marcus said, tucking the folder under his arm. "But I can't make any promises. My focus is here on Brooksville." Bennett nodded, seemingly satisfied with this response. "Of course. Take your time. We're in no rush." With that, he excused himself, leaving Marcus and Sarah alone once more. Sarah watched Bennett's retreating figure, a slight frown on her face. "They're not going to let up, you know," she said softly. "Once the Montgomerys see potential in something, or someone, they pursue it relentlessly." Marcus sighed, feeling the weight of the folder under his arm. "I know, but I can't lose sight of why I started this in the first place. It was never about building an empire or becoming some kind of philanthropic figurehead." Sarah placed a hand on his arm, her touch reassuring. "I know that, Marcus, and that's why you're the right person for this. You won't let the power go to your head." As they stood there, surrounded by the buzz of community activity, Marcus felt a surge of determination. He had navigated the complexities of the Montgomery family's world this far. He could continue to do so, as long as he stayed true to his principles. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. Marcus threw himself into the work, helping volunteers, discussing plans for new programs with the center's staff, and meeting with local business owners who were interested in supporting their efforts. By the time evening fell, he was exhausted but fulfilled. As he walked home, the black SUV that had once been a source of anxiety now followed at a discreet distance. Marcus had come to accept its presence as part of his new reality. It was a reminder of the power and influence he now wielded, but also of the responsibilities that came with it. At home, Marcus settled into his favorite chair, the folder Bennett had given him sitting on the coffee table. He stared at it for a long moment, torn between curiosity and apprehension. Finally, with a deep breath, he opened it. The proposals inside were ambitious, to say the least. The Montgomery family envisioned a network of community centers across the state, each one modeled after the success in Brooksville. They wanted Marcus to oversee the entire operation, to become the face of a movement that could potentially change thousands of lives. As he read through the documents, Marcus felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. The potential for good was enormous, but so was the potential for losing his way. He had seen how power could corrupt, how even the best intentions could be twisted by greed or ego. Marcus stayed up late into the night, poring over the proposals, making notes, and wrestling with the decision before him. By the time he finally went to bed, his mind was still whirling with possibilities and concerns. The next morning, Marcus woke early, his decisions still unmade. He went through his usual routine: coffee, a quick breakfast, and a walk around the neighborhood. As he passed by houses where he knew families were struggling, where children faced uncertain futures, the weight of his potential influence pressed down on him. When he arrived at the community center, he was surprised to see Aunt Clara waiting for him. Her weathered face creased into a smile as he approached. "Aunt Clara," he said, giving her a warm hug, "what brings you here so early?" She patted his cheek affectionately. "I had a feeling you might need some of my famous advice this morning." Marcus couldn't help but chuckle. Aunt Clara had an uncanny ability to sense when he was grappling with something important. "You're right about that," he admitted. "How about we grab a coffee and talk?" They settled into a quiet corner of the center's cafeteria, steaming mugs of coffee in front of them. Marcus filled Aunt Clara in on the Montgomery family's proposal, voicing his concerns and hopes. Aunt Clara listened intently, her eyes sharp and focused. When Marcus finished, she was quiet for a moment, considering her words carefully. "You know, Marcus," she began, her voice gentle but firm, "when I was a young woman, I faced a choice not unlike yours. It wasn't about money or influence, but it was about the direction my life would take. I could stay in our little town, marry the boy everyone expected me to marry, and live the life that was laid out for me. Or I could leave, pursue my dreams, and face the unknown." Marcus leaned forward, intrigued. Aunt Clara rarely spoke about her youth. "What did you do?" A wistful smile played across her lips. "I left. I traveled, I studied, I experienced things I never could have imagined. And you know what? It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. But I never regretted it, because I knew I was being true to myself." She reached across the table, placing her hand over Marcus's. "The question you need to ask yourself, Marcus, is not whether you should take this opportunity. The question is, can you stay true to yourself and your values if you do?" Marcus nodded slowly, turning her words over in his mind. "But how can I be sure? How do I know I won't lose my way?" Aunt Clara's eyes twinkled with wisdom. "You can't be sure, my dear. That's the nature of life. But I know you, Marcus. I've watched you grow from a boy into the man you are today. You have a strong moral compass, and as long as you keep listening to it, you'll find your way." As they finished their coffee, Marcus felt a sense of clarity settling over him. Aunt Clara's words had struck a chord, reminding him of the values that had guided him this far. "Thank you, Aunt Clara," he said as they stood to leave. "I think I know what I need to do." She smiled, patting his arm. "You always did, Marcus. You just needed a little reminder." With renewed purpose, Marcus spent the next few days carefully considering the Montgomery family's proposal. He spoke with community leaders, sought advice from mentors, and spent long hours in reflection. Finally, he felt ready to make his decision. He arranged a meeting with James Bennett, choosing to hold it at the community center rather than in some sterile corporate office. As Bennett arrived, looking slightly out of place in his expensive suit, Marcus felt a sense of calm certainty. "Mr. Bennett," Marcus began, once they were seated in his modest office, "I've given your proposal a lot of thought." Bennett leaned forward, his expression eager. And Marcus took a deep breath. "I'm interested in moving forward, but with some conditions." He outlined his vision, a network of community centers that would remain true to the grassroots, community-driven model they had established in Brooksville. Each center would be tailored to the needs of its specific community, with local leaders playing a crucial role in decision-making. Marcus would oversee the network, but he insisted on maintaining his home and base of operations in Brooksville. "I won't become some distant figurehead," Marcus explained. "I need to stay connected to the people we're trying to help. And I want safeguards in place to ensure that the focus remains on community service, not on building some kind of corporate empire." Bennett listened intently, his expression unreadable. When Marcus finished, there was a long moment of silence. "Mr. Johnson," Bennett finally said, "I have to admit, when the family first suggested this expanded role for you, I had my doubts. I wondered if you had the ambition for it." He paused, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I see now that I underestimated you. Your ambition isn't for personal gain, but for the greater good." "That's refreshing," Marcus felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "So, you think the family will agree to my terms?" Bennett nodded. "Ido. In fact, I think they'll be impressed by your foresight and commitment to your principles. It's precisely those qualities that make you the right person for this role." As Bennett left, promising to draft a new agreement that incorporated Marcus's conditions, Marcus felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. He was stepping into a larger world, one filled with both great potential and great challenges. Over the next few months, Marcus threw himself into the work of expanding the community center model. He traveled to other towns and cities, meeting with local leaders and community members, listening to their needs and concerns. Each new center was a unique challenge, requiring careful planning and collaboration. Throughout it all, Marcus remained grounded in his values. He made a point of spending time in each community, getting to know the people he was there to serve. He insisted on transparency in all their operations, regularly publishing reports on how funds were being used and the impact they were having. The work was exhausting but deeply fulfilling. Marcus watched as communities began to transform, much as Brooksville had. Children who had once seemed destined for trouble were now excelling in after-school programs. Adults who had struggled to find work were gaining new skills and finding employment. Families that had been on the brink of falling apart were getting the support they needed to stay together. But as the network of community centers grew, so did the challenges. Marcus found himself navigating complex political landscapes, dealing with resistant local governments, and fending off attempts by less scrupulous individuals to profit from their work. One particularly difficult situation arose in a small city where a corrupt mayor saw the community center as a threat to his power base. The mayor began a smear campaign, spreading false rumors about the center's intentions and Marcus's character. It was during this crisis that Marcus truly understood the power he now wielded. With a few phone calls, he could have had the mayor removed from office. The Montgomery family certainly had the influence to make it happen. But Marcus knew that using that kind of power would betray everything he stood for. Instead, he chose a different path. He went to the city, not with an army of lawyers or PR specialists, but with an open heart and a willingness to listen. He met with community members, addressed their concerns honestly, and invited the mayor to see the work they were doing firsthand. It wasn't an easy process, and there were moments when Marcus doubted whether his approach would work. But slowly, steadily, the tide began to turn. The mayor, faced with the reality of the positive changes the community center was bringing, eventually became one of its strongest supporters. This experience reinforced Marcus's belief in the power of grassroots change. It wasn't about wielding influence from on high, but about working alongside people, empowering them to create the changes they wanted to see in their communities. As the months turned into years, Marcus watched with a sense of awe as the network of community centers grew and flourished. Each center was unique, reflecting the needs and character of its community, but they were all united by a common purpose: to uplift, to empower, and to bring people together. Throughout it all, Marcus remained true to himself. He still lived in his modest home in Brooksville, still spent time chatting with neighbors and helping out at local events. The black SUV still followed him, a reminder of the powerful forces he now moved among, but it no longer felt like a shadow looming over him. Instead, it was simply a tool, one of many he had at his disposal to do good in the world. One crisp autumn day, 5 years after he had first helped Sarah Montgomery on that lonely stretch of road, Marcus stood outside the Brooksville Community Center. A crowd had gathered for the unveiling of a new wing dedicated to providing healthcare services to underserved members of the community. As Marcus prepared to give his speech, he caught sight of familiar faces in the crowd. There was Aunt Clara, her eyes shining with pride; Derek and Angela, who had become integral parts of the community center's operations. And there, standing near the back, was Sarah Montgomery, a warm smile on her face. Marcus took a deep breath and stepped up to the podium. As he looked out over the sea of faces, people whose lives had been touched by the work they had done together, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. 5 years ago, he began, his voice strong and clear, I made a choice to accept an opportunity that I never expected, and to use it in a way that would benefit not just me but all of us. Standing here today, seeing all that we've accomplished together, I know it was the right choice." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. "But the truth is, it wasn't just my choice. It was all of ours. Every person who volunteered their time, every child who came here to learn, every family that found support in their darkest hours. You all chose to be part of this. You chose to believe that we could make a difference, that we could build something meaningful together." Marcus felt a lump form in his throat as he continued. "I've traveled to many places over the past few years, seen communities transform in ways I never thought possible. And do you know what I've learned? That the power to change the world doesn't come from money or influence. It comes from people who care, who work hard, who refuse to give up even when things seem impossible." He gestured to the new wing behind him. "This building and all the others like it across the country, they're not monuments to any one person or family. They're monuments to the human spirit, to our capacity for kindness and compassion. They're proof that when we come together, when we choose to see the best in each other and to work towards a common goal, there's nothing we can't accomplish." As Marcus finished his speech, the crowd erupted in applause. He stepped back from the podium, feeling a mix of emotions: pride in what they had accomplished, humility in the face of the community's support, and a renewed determination to continue the work they had begun. Later, as the crowd mingled and explored the new wing, Marcus found a quiet moment with Sarah. They stood off to the side, watching the bustling activity around them. "You know," Sarah said, a hint of wonder in her voice, "when I first met you that night, I never could have imagined all of this." Marcus chuckled softly. "Neither could I. Life has a funny way of surprising us, doesn't it?" "It does," said Sarah. In the end, Marcus understood that true change came from the collective efforts of individuals who cared deeply about their community. The power he had gained was merely a tool to amplify the kindness and compassion that had always guided him. His life had indeed changed, but at his core, he remained the same man, dedicated to uplifting others and staying true to the values that had brought him this far. What would you have done if you were in Marcus's position and found yourself facing a life-changing offer after a simple act of kindness? Would you have accepted the mysterious reward, or would you have hesitated? If you enjoyed this story of unexpected twists, moral dilemmas, and the power of doing good, please consider subscribing to my channel. I put a lot of effort into creating these impactful narratives, and your support truly means the world to me. Thank you for being a part of this journey.